I'm Wes Gollum, the New Hampshire Energy Geek, and today I'm here in Durham with Todd Selig, and you're the Town Administrator for Durham?
Yes, that's correct.
And I'm here because I've heard you're doing really good things in the area of efficiency and sustainability, and I'd like to hear about that. So,
Great. Okay.
thanks for having me.
It is a pleasure. Thank you very much.
So please tell me, start where you will, about what you're doing and...
Sure. So, we've been in an environment where over the last, 20 years or so, there's been a lot of discussion first about global warming. There was a lot of skepticism about that. And then more recently, the conversation shifted from that to this concept of climate change. And, our understanding in Durham is that the preponderance of science that's out there suggests that, in fact, the Earth's environment is warming, and that human beings have a material impact on that.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've been doing a variety of things in Durham over many, many years to try to prepare ourselves for climate change, but also just to run good business operations in Durham. Because one of the things climate change means for us is increased intensity of big storm events.
Mm-hmm.
It could be snowstorms, it could be rainstorms, it could be flooding events. And Durham is on the Great Bay Estuary, and we have two major rivers that run through our town, the Lamprey River and the Oyster River. And so when it rains a lot, we flood in significant parts of the town. And so really this started out by recognizing that we're experiencing quite a few 100-year floods over a span of like 4 or 5 or 6 years. And it was creating property damage. It was isolating entire neighborhoods that we literally could not access via our roads. And that was of real concern. Mm-hmm. So we started an initial program of trying to identify where the parts of town were that were flooding regularly. And then we started to build into our long-range capital improvement program improvements that would help to mitigate those known impacts that we were experiencing. So that was sort of our entrance into dealing with this issue of climate change. Mm-hmm. And from there, we started to look at other aspects as well. We looked inward at the municipality's own structures. And one of the things we recognized was that we had old structures. So, our town hall was located in 2 private homes that had been purchased and then connected in the 1970s by a breezeway. The homes were built in the late 1800s, and the insulation was very poor. I would sort of laugh in the winter because in my office at the old facility, from my torso up would be hot, I'd be sweating, and my feet were ice blocks in the winter because the insulation was just so poor. And the people in the building generally experienced those same conditions. So, that's one example. We identified that facility as being deficient, not only in terms of meeting any modern energy standards, but also it was not meeting the current needs of the municipality. We found the same thing for our public library, for our police department, and the same is still true for our fire department. And over the last 10 years, we have moved forward with a major construction program on a building-by-building basis. And so we have built a brand new library on Madbury Road, which is a state-of-the-art facility, meets all the modern energy codes and standards. We then moved on to the Durham Town Hall, and we actually purchased a property directly across the street from the old town office building. It was a People's United Bank building, mm-hmm. And we ultimately retrofitted that structure. We doubled the size of the building to create public meeting space and accessible elevators and things like that. And we opted to make the new town hall project a LEED certified silver project. And so this new building we're in now, which has been here for our 5th year of operation, is a LEED certified silver facility, which means that we worked hard to reuse as many aspects of the former bank building as possible, but we also implemented energy efficiency standards. We made the most of natural light. We tried to just be as environmentally friendly and energy conscious as we could as part of this building. And it's been just a real success. The community is very proud of it, and the staff who work here are just so pleased to have a beautiful state-of-the-art building to be in. So that's another example. And then most recently, last year, we approved a bond issue to completely rehab and add on to the Durham Police Department, which is located on Dover Road. And now that too meets all the modern energy codes. We did not make that a LEED certified building. There is an additional cost in doing so. And so while the council, we operate under a council manager form of government here, the council felt it was important to do it at the town hall to really set the tone. We didn't opt to do the LEED program at the library or the police department, but we still have buildings that meet the most modern energy standards.
Does Durham have any kind of stretch codes, do you know?
The state was operating under, until a bill was signed into law last week, I think, under the 2012 construction codes.
Okay.
And last week it was updated to reflect the 2015 codes. But in Durham, we self-adopted the most recent energy code.
So that's exactly what I mean by a stretch code.
We've been operating under the 2018 energy code, and in fact, I'm the municipal generalist. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. That's great.
Durham is located in a climate zone that is not as cold as sort of Maine and the counties north of Stratford County. So Durham self-identified with the more northern Maine, New Hampshire counties in terms of meeting energy requirements. So we've chosen to have more stringent energy standards. So while for construction codes it's been 2012 and now 15, for energy codes it's been whatever the code of the year the buildings were built required, and per a colder climate requirement. So one of the other things that we have done is we have required more efficient fixtures as well for construction in Durham.
Lighting fixtures?
Water fixtures.
Oh, I see.
So that we self-adopted more stringent sort of low-flow fixtures, so that when people were going to do a renovation project in their home or business, they'd be required to put in a low-flow fixture. And that was in recognition of the fact that we had limits on our water supply, and with a growing population, we had to do a better job living within our means in terms of water. And that's been helpful as well. So while the population has grown quite a bit over the last 10 years, our water usage has stayed flat, which has been great.
Excellent.
It's been really helpful. So something else that we have done is we really tried to embrace different forms of renewable power. So we spent some time looking at whether wind power and wind turbines would be viable here in Durham, and we determined that they would not be based upon wind velocities.
Yeah.
So we just ruled that out long ago. We then looked at solar, and we moved ahead 6 years ago with our first power purchase agreement, which put solar panels on 3 municipal facilities. One was a 99 kW array on our municipal ice rink at the Churchill Rink, a 15 kW array on the top of our new library, and a 6 kW array on the top of the police department. And the arrays are owned by Revision Energy, which was our partner in those programs. So we purchased power from them. We had negotiated the agreements to reflect the prevailing price for power. So if we were paying X for power from Eversource, that's what the rate would be from Revision.
So you didn't get a discount?
We did not get a discount for that particular array. And our goal was simply to pay no more than we were already paying for power, but to move to renewable sources. And our plan is, and we can start to do this next year, to buy out those 3 arrays, so they'll become municipal infrastructure, and that will then bring our actual energy costs down.
And how are you going to pay for those purchases?
We are planning to bond that buyout, and the estimated cost is around $120,000 plus or minus. And we have the option to simply continue purchasing it from Revision, Purchasing Power, and we're going to be spending time this year with our Energy Committee evaluating whether it really makes sense to buy them out, or whether, in which case we accept some risk for maintaining the array, or whether it's better to keep buying power. And I have to say, it worked out well this past year, having the arrays owned by the third party, because if you remember last summer, we had that squirrel outbreak where squirrels were everywhere, and squirrels got into the wiring on the array and created significant problems. So it was on the private company to replace that wiring and not the town. So
Interesting.
that worked out well for us. We felt the best plan was the power purchase agreement. We weren't exposing we weren't going to cash in on savings, but that wasn't our goal. It was to be more environmentally conscious and to help with our global impact on climate change. So, there was no downside. We weren't going to pay any more for the power. We weren't responsible for maintaining the panels. And if it made sense at a future date after year 6, we would buy it out. If it didn't, we'd keep buying the power. And we actually, after we did that phase 1, the 3 projects, we worked with Revision to do a phase 2, which was significantly larger. So with phase 2, our goal was to build an array large enough to offset 100% of the town's, of the municipality's electric needs, with the exception of our wastewater treatment plant, which is like an energy hog.
Yeah.
So we ultimately worked with Revision and another company called IGS Solar, which is, I think, out of the Midwest somewhere, and built a 640 kW array at the town of Durham's gravel pit we own in Lee, New Hampshire. And that was an incredibly hard and complicated project because rather than, in that instance, the power provider, IGS Solar, was not willing to do an agreement where the cost of power simply mirrored Eversource. They wanted to lock in the cost. So in that instance, we actually agreed on a rate that was slightly less than what we were currently paying for power. And we agreed on an inflation index going forward, which is about 2% a year over a 30-year term. And historically, the cost of buying power is more than 2% a year, the increase. So we made the gamble, essentially, that over that 30-year term, we'll make out better at a 2% annual inflation increase than we would have just buying power off the market. But it could go against us. We're not sure. But
And that's not a power purchase agreement?
it is.
Oh,
That's
okay.
our PPA 2 is with IGS Solar.
I see.
And so it is a power purchase agreement. And there too, after year 6, we have the option to buy that out. Now that array, since it's so much larger, would be a buy-in of over $1 million. And so we're really going to have to crunch the numbers on whether it makes sense to buy that out or not. But so far, it's producing the power that was estimated. We've had no problems to date. And so that's been a success. And the other thing we've done is, we didn't just rush into building solar panels. We first looked inward to say, what could we do to reduce our electric demand? So, the buildings that we have not replaced, we looked at insulation, we looked at windows, we looked at the lighting, we made all those enhancements to get it as energy efficient in as cost effective a manner as we could, and then we started to spec out the solar panels. And we did the same thing with our lighting, our street lighting all through town. We had the old, they were the old style sodium-based lights, and they lit up things well. They had a nice sort of just off yellow hue to them, which was comfortable in the eye. But we spec'd out, spent a lot of time evaluating replacement lighting with LED.
Mhm.
And we actually tested out a few different fixtures in one of our parking lots for about a year and a half to see which one we liked the most.
Mhm.
And we identified the fixture we liked, and then we worked with Eversource and the Public Utilities Commission to actually set a rate for municipalities for LED lighting. And before that, there was no rate, so we couldn't move to LED. And so
Really?
we made the change,
Mhm.
and that has dropped our annual electric bill by like 70%. You know, it was a huge reduction in energy. So by reducing that demand as well and making our buildings more efficient, the new array with the arrays we had were able to offset 100% of the energy use. Now the problem we have at the wastewater plant is it's again it's such a it uses so much energy, and it uses it in big chunks that while it's expensive to run it, the cost of energy is fairly low for that plant because we get a sort of an industrial rate.
Mhm.
And so far, we've not been able to match that rate with any kind of a solar kind of array. So we're hopeful maybe one day the cost of the arrays will come down, or we'll come up with trackers that are more efficient, or some other strategy.
So another question that comes up, and I guess I'm talking big picture here, but when you hear about the things you're doing, you basically hear two sides to things. I mean, I'm being involved a lot with the residential side. Whenever we talked about raising the building codes or anything like that, the builders would squawk, it's too expensive, it's really gonna hurt my business and whatnot. And then, of course, there's the other side of all the reasons to do this. I'm wondering, from the big picture, how has the public reacted? And do you have any sense as to the economics? Has this been an economic benefit to the people that are, forgive the word, subjected to these more stringent rules?
Well, so it's really interesting. So a lot of, like I mentioned earlier, some of the code requirements we put in place. But one thing that we did that's, it's an advisory requirement. So if you're gonna build new construction in Durham and you're looking for a building permit or planning board, site plan or subdivision approval, our local volunteer energy committee has come up with an energy checklist that we require everyone fill out, which sort of highlights all the possible things you could do to make your project more energy efficient. You don't have to do them all. You almost don't have to do any of them, but at least you're going through and thinking about, well, what might work for me? Maybe it's solar, maybe it's geothermal, maybe it's, you know, just better insulation, maybe it's the way you orientate your house on the lot. And we found that that sort of voluntary approach has been really helpful. Now,
Well, you say voluntary, but
Yes.
builders must come here and say, wow, I only have to do the 2006, or is it 2008 code now?
Well,
and you guys require 2012, I mean, do you
that's
get?
right. So when the town council was considering increasing the threshold, the requirements for the energy code, and the water requirement, you know, the water efficiency requirements, we did have developers who came forward and complained. And the council listened to them and was very respectful of them. But their feeling was, look, you're in this for a short-term gain, and we're in this for the long-term, for the benefit and health of our community, our residents, and the planet. And so what I hear talking to residents who have ultimately purchased the new properties that are being built is, wow, I have such an efficient property. My electric bill is way less than it was where I came from, and I'm really glad I have it. So the builder complained. It's sort of the first generation that has to pay for that complains up front, but over time people appreciate it.
Today, it's a nice sunny day. It's mid-30s. It's 35 outside, and we've got enough solar gain in here right now that it's actually 71 degrees in the house. Even though our thermostats are set in the 60s, it really does stay quite comfortable in here. It's by far the most comfortable house I've ever been in or owned. You know, there's no drafts, there's no hot spots, no cold spots. Very comfortable throughout. you can stand right next to a door or a window and not really feel the cold from the outside, even when it's, down in the single digits. So it's quite nice.
I mean, sort of an example I might offer is this real life case. We had a business in town that it was a home in town. They did changes and they had to make a number of updates in their home as part of the renovations to comply with the new fire codes. And one of them was installing carbon monoxide detectors. So they installed the detectors, they complained, they expressed concern to, supervisor in the fire department, et cetera. And a couple years went by and they had an alarm trip. The alarm went off and they were really frustrated that the alarm was going off, and the fire department came. And in fact, they had a malfunction in their boiler and there was carbon monoxide in the house. And if the alarm hadn't worked, they probably would have died.
Yep.
And so they actually have come forward now very vocally to say, we didn't like it at the time, it cost us money, but it saved our life. So again, energy efficiency isn't maybe gonna save your life short term, so I don't wanna make more of it than
Right.
it should. But maybe long term, if we all do it, it'll have a measurable impact on the planet. So another thing that we've done, again, this is voluntary, is, and it's sort of interesting, is again, we have property on the Great Bay, and the Great Bay is tidal, so when we have extraordinarily high tides, we see the tide inching really close to certain properties. And at some of our parks, it actually goes up beyond our benches and things and creates issues. So we've worked with UNH and the Stratford Regional Planning Commission, and we have estimates on projected sea level rise that will likely impact Durham over the next 50 to 100 years. And we have three estimates, sort of a low rise estimate, a medium rise estimate, and a high rise estimate if nothing's done to address sea level rise or to address climate change. So we have, the council has adopted an ordinance which requires somebody who owns a property in one of the zones that is projected to be impacted by the medium sea level rise projection. And if you're planning to do any kind of a building project in that zone, again, you have to come in and get a flood mitigation checklist, which clearly warns you that we project with the best science that this property is going to be impacted in the future. And it suggests a whole host of things you might consider, like providing freeboard, between your house and the water, and other types of measures to make your house more secure if there was inundation of floodwaters. And again, we're not requiring that the homeowner do anything, but we're simply requiring that they arm themselves with information, so at least they know.
Good for you. Yeah.
And we thought that was a good way to do it, rather than requiring. It's educational. And so that's a new initiative that we just moved forward about a year ago. And the other thing I would say is, like one thing that you and I had talked about earlier was, does Durham have any net zero goals that we've established? So that's an active topic of conversation on my mind, and some people's minds in Durham, in that we've not adopted a standard out there. What we have done is the council and their goals have outlined being a sustainable, resilient community and recognizing the projected future impacts of climate change on Durham and getting ready for that. So it's sort of a big picture approach. And then from there we've sort of gone about it old school. We've said, what makes sense for Durham in our unique situation? We're having flooding in these neighborhoods and these roads, let's deal with those neighborhoods and roads. We have the ability to be more energy efficient. We've evaluated the payoff. Typically, we're trying to look at something that would be cash flow positive in the 6 to 10 year time frame. That was what we thought was a reasonable time frame. And if we could do something, make an investment, and it had that 6 to 10 year payoff, like, we were good. We thought it was a good business case, so we moved forward with it. We've done advisory things and some things requiring regulation. But like, we are still a modest sized community, and we don't have specialized staff that deal in climate change. I have no one on staff who's a specialist in greenhouse gas emissions or measuring energy efficiency. So we've not yet signed on to any particular effort. And so when the Paris Climate Accord was in the news and the United States was thinking of dropping out of that, we had members of our energy committee who came forward and said, look, Todd, Durham should sign on to the Paris Climate Accord. And my response was, well, okay, that sounds great, it might make a nice newspaper splash, but what does it actually mean for Durham? And can you even tell me what our energy footprint is right now? What is our fossil fuel footprint? What are we trying to achieve? And who's going to keep track of that? How are we going to count, how are we going to measure it? And no one to date has had any answers on those questions. So
Are you familiar with Portfolio Manager?
I've heard of it, but we've not utilized it.
You might consider at least looking at that,
Okay.
because that gives you a really good idea of all kinds of measures, greenhouse gases, fossil fuel.
Our energy committee has done some analysis of individual buildings, and we've brought in specialists who can look at things. But we're just sort of ramping up to say, okay, how do we take all these individual initiatives we've done, which collectively kind of sort of demonstrate we've been really serious about it, and no one's been like
Portfolio manager.
yeah, exactly. So other things that we've done in town, and again, these have just been sort of good business practice things. I think are we've looked at the vehicles in our departments, and we've moved to more energy efficient vehicles. We've been really conscious when when the fire department needs the largest vehicle possible to do inspection work. We're asking the question: do you really need that? A Tahoe, or can you get by with an Explorer, or could you get by with simply a car? That's a minimalistic car to drive around in. We sort of downshift until the vehicles aren't worth much of anything, but we get every mile out of that vehicle. We've made good inroads there. So we're doing stuff there. We obtained a grant, and we partnered with UNH, and we put a vehicle electric charging station downtown to try to encourage electric vehicle use. And our thought there downtown was that it would encourage, there are parts of New Hampshire that are sort of a desert with charging stations. So we felt if we had a charging station, if we had a charging station downtown in Durham, electric vehicle users might come down and shop downtown while their vehicle's charging, which is good for the businesses.
Sure.
So we've just tried to take a very sort of common sense, reasonable approach to this, and it's taken a decade or so. But if you look at all the things we've done, as a group, we've done a lot. And
You sure have.
the community has been very supportive, and we provide good justification when we talk about things. So Durham is home to the University of New Hampshire. We're on the seacoast. We are a fairly liberal, progressive community. But let me tell you, we have some serious number crunchers on our town council and on staff, and we're looking out for the business case of the town. We want it to make good business sense before we do something.
Excellent.
So it's been good.
What would you suggest to other towns that are lower on the curve here, that want to address sustainability and resiliency? Where should they start, do you think?
So I think I've heard people say, "Oh gosh, it's too late to do anything, so why do anything at all?" I think that's hogwash. There is time to take action. It would have been terrific if we'd all been really mobilizing a decade ago, but we mobilize when we start to feel it and see it and believe it. And I think that's where most people are now. So it's time to get started. And I would focus on the low-hanging fruit, things that you can do. So if you have a vehicle pool at your public works department or police department that's sort of 10-year-old plus vehicles, and you can go from a 10 mile per gallon vehicle to a 22 mile per gallon vehicle, hey, that's like improving your energy
50%.
mileage by 50%. It's good. So small steps like that can be a big help. I think the next step would be look at your municipal buildings and have somebody come in to do an assessment on energy efficiency, because if you haven't done that in a long time, you will likely find that with some short money you can have some long-term economic benefits for your town. And you'll be doing something good for the environment, and if you're a select person or an administrative assistant or a town manager somewhere, like you can be the hero showing your community how to save money and doing the right thing in the process. So I think that kind of thing makes sense. If you're gonna do a new building, you shouldn't do the new building just because you wanna be more energy efficient. That's a really expensive way to be energy efficient. But if your existing building is no longer meeting your needs and you can do something new and in the process make a few enhancements that make that more energy efficient, then like over the lifespan of the building, and for municipal buildings, we're typically talking like on the order of decades, you can have a positive economic impact and you can do something good for the environment. So I think it's an easier argument to make than what Durham has done, where we've adopted a more stringent energy code than is required. That's arguably taking money out of the developer's pocket, so they're gonna fight you hard on that. But again, I would encourage communities to look at, okay, the developer's in there to make a buck, but we're all in there for the long term. And over the long term, the homeowner, the person who's actually gonna live there, is gonna pay less and be more energy secure than would otherwise be the case. If you leave it to the developer, they're gonna put in the least expensive insulation system and heating system possible and charge you the maximum price. I mean, another thing, I think people should think a little bit about solar as well, and this is in Durham. In Durham, we take a long time to think about initiatives, a lot of conversations. So for now more than 18 months, we've been talking about a change to our zoning ordinance that would put some additional restrictions on where you can place freestanding solar panels in residential and commercial zones. Because we've had a few instances where people have installed a tracker array in what was prior to that viewed as a very rural district. And the neighborhood did not like the aesthetic impact of that very industrial looking tracker array against the backdrop of the farmland around it. So now we're talking about, well, if you want to do an array like that, perhaps it shouldn't be in the front yard. It should be either the side yard or the rear yard, or there should be some level of appropriate screening around it so it's not just like sticking out like a sore thumb. And we've also been talking about like large-scale industrial for-profit arrays. And we have a lot of undeveloped acreage in Durham, and the thought was, if a mega company came in and wanted to put in a 2 gigawatt array somewhere, or a 30 gigawatt array, would we want that in Durham? Where would we want it in Durham? So we're having that conversation too. So as solar becomes more prevalent, I think this is really the time for communities to think about where they think solar makes sense and under what conditions. Because if you don't have it in place, you might just wind up with a really in-your-face array that might be good for the environment, but might negatively impact your quality of life. So you want to think about that too. So like in Durham, we're not all about solar. We're trying to find a balance between quality of life solar placement, making sure it makes economic sense.
Excellent.
Yeah. Okay.
This is great.
Okay, cool.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Nice to talk with you.
You too.